When people think about World War II armor, they picture tanks rolling across battlefields. Shermans, Tigers, T-34s. But the reality was far more complex. The armies of World War II didn't just use tanks, they deployed an entire ecosystem of armored vehicles, each designed for a specific tactical purpose that tanks alone could never fulfill. Understanding these vehicles means understanding how modern war was actually fought. Light tanks. Fast, lightly armored, designed for one thing: getting information and exploiting speed where heavier tanks couldn't follow. The American M5 Stuart could hit 36 miles per hour. Fast for 1942. Armed with a 37mm gun, it served from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of the Pacific. The British called it Honey for its smooth ride. Over 8,800 were built. The German Panzer II was even lighter, just 8.9 tons, armed with a 20mm autocannon. At the start of the war, 1,127 Panzer IIs made up the largest share of German armor. The Soviet T-70 mounted a 45mm gun and weighed barely 9 tons. It fought at Stalingrad and Kursk with a two-man crew. The commander loaded, aimed, and fired, all by himself. Here's the quiet detail that changes how we see light tanks. They were never meant to win fights against enemy armor. The M5 Stuart's 37mm gun could barely scratch 30mm of armor at 500 yards. The Panzer II's 20mm autocannon was useless against anything heavier than another light tank. The T-70's 45mm gun gave crews a fighting chance, but only at point-blank range, and only from the side. By 1943, a single German PaK-40 anti-tank gun could destroy a T-70 from over 1,000 meters. Speed was their armor. Mobility was their weapon. That was the entire point. But light tanks had limits. As anti-tank weapons spread across every front, speed stopped mattering when one well-placed gun could kill you from a kilometer away. The British pulled Stuarts from tank combat after North Africa, relegated them to reconnaissance only. The Germans withdrew Panzer IIs from the Eastern Front by 1942, converted the survivors into tank destroyers and self-propelled guns. The Soviets stopped building T-70s in October 1943, redirected the factories to build Su-76 assault guns instead. Light tanks show that early war doctrine prioritized speed until firepower made that speed irrelevant. Medium tanks. The workhorses. Not the most powerful, not the most impressive, but the ones that decided the war. The American M4 Sherman was built in staggering numbers. 49,234 examples. More than any other Allied tank, armed with a 75 mm gun, protected by 51 mm of frontal armor. Top speed 30 miles per hour. 5-man crew. It was reliable. It was simple. It kept running. The Soviet T-34 was produced in even greater numbers. Approximately 57,000 by war's end, the most produced tank of World War II. Armed with a 76.2mm gun, revolutionary sloped armor, fast, deadly, and available in overwhelming quantities. The German Panzer IV evolved throughout the war, started as infantry support, ended as a frontline tank destroyer mounting a long 75mm gun. About 8,500 were built. A critical detail often overlooked is why T-34 sloped armor changed everything. Traditional tanks used vertical armor, 45 mm thick straight up and down. The T-34 angled that same 45 mm plate at 60 degrees. Suddenly, the effective thickness doubled to 90 mm against a direct hit. Better still, shells ricocheted. They didn't just fail to penetrate, they bounced off entirely. This forced every nation to rethink tank design from the ground up. But here's the other half of the story. German tanks like the Panther had better guns, thicker armor, superior optics. They also broke down constantly. The Sherman didn't. It could drive 100 miles without mechanical failure. It could be repaired in a field with common tools. This wasn't mediocrity. This was a strategic genius in steel. How they struggled against late-war heavy tanks reveals the limits. A Sherman 75 mm gun couldn't penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at combat range. Period. T-34 76 crews faced the same problem against Panthers. The Panzer IV, despite upgrades, was outgunned by the Sherman Firefly and the T-34-85. Medium tanks won through numbers, maneuver, and combined arms. Not individual superiority, Medium tanks were not the most powerful vehicles on the battlefield, but they were the ones that decided the war. Heavy tanks, breakthrough weapons, designed to absorb punishment and deliver devastating firepower. Psychological weapons as much as physical ones. The German Tiger I, armed with the legendary 88 BME gun, protected by 100 BME of frontal armor, 54 tons of steel. Only 1,347 were ever built. At Villers-Bocage, one Tiger destroyed 14 British tanks and 15 other vehicles in 15 minutes. The Tiger II was even more extreme. 69 tons, 150 mm of frontal armor. A longer, more powerful 88 mm gun, just 489 were produced. The Soviet IS-2 mounted a massive 122 mm gun capable of destroying any German tank at range. About 3,854 were built. The British Churchill was slower but better armored than most medium tanks. 5,640 examples served from North Africa to Northwest Europe, proving themselves in infantry support. Importantly, this was not about invincibility. The Tiger I consumed 450 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. The Panzer IV needed only 200. Its Maybach engine overheated. Required constant maintenance. Final drive failures were common. One Tiger could hold up an entire Allied advance. It also tied down German logistics like an anchor. Moving Tigers required specialized rail cars. Crossing bridges meant weight calculations. Getting them to the front consumed more fuel than operating them in combat. The Tiger II was worse, over 68 tons, slower than the Tiger I, even more mechanically unreliable, resource-intensive, slow, prone to breakdowns. Germany couldn't produce them in numbers that mattered. The Soviet IS-2 was more reliable but still used sparingly. The Churchill was dependable but lacked speed for exploitation. By late 1944, heavy tanks peaked and declined. Heavy tanks proved that tactical dominance means nothing without strategic mobility. Tank destroyers. Purpose-built for one mission. Kill enemy tanks. Cheaper and faster than tanks could. The German Sturmgäste 30 started as infantry support. It became the most produced German armored fighting vehicle of the war. Over 10,500 examples. Armed with a 75 mini-gun. Protected by 80 mini-minis of frontal armor. It achieved kill ratios that exceeded dedicated tanks. The American M10 Wolverine mounted a 76 mm gun on a Sherman chassis with an open-top turret. About 6,700 were produced. The Soviet Su-85 and Su-100 mounted 85 mm and 100 mm guns on T-34 chassis. Built by the thousands to counter German heavy armor. A revealing detail is how Stug the 3 units achieved devastating effectiveness. Fixed guns, no turret. This meant simpler production. Lower cost. Lower profile too. Harder to spot. Harder to hit. But the real advantage was doctrinal. Tank destroyers didn't maneuver in open battle. They ambushed. They waited in prepared positions until enemy tanks entered kill zones. Then they fired. Then they relocated. German Stug the 3 units claimed thousands of Soviet tanks on the Eastern Front. American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized speed and flanking, using mobility to compensate for open tops and thinner armor. Vulnerable to flanking. Limited tactical flexibility. A tank destroyer caught in the open by infantry was dead. The M10's open top made it vulnerable to artillery airbursts and hand grenades. Fixed guns couldn't respond quickly to threats from multiple directions. Tank destroyers required infantry support. They couldn't fight in fluid, mobile warfare. Tank destroyers existed for one reason: to kill tanks cheaper and faster than tanks themselves could. Self-propelled artillery. Mobile firepower. Artillery mounted on track chassis. The range and punch of artillery with the mobility of tanks. The German Westbay and Hummel mounted 105 mm and 150 mm howitzers on the Panzer II and Panzer IV chassis. The American M7 Priest carried a 105 mm howitzer on a Sherman chassis. Over 4,200 were built. It equipped armored divisions from North Africa through Northwest Europe. The Soviet Su-152 mounted a 152 mm howitzer gun on a KV-1 chassis. It earned the nickname Beast Killer for destroying tigers and elephants at Kursk. About 670 were produced. Here's the quiet detail that changes how we see self-propelled artillery. They enabled blitzkrieg, Traditional towed artillery needed horses or trucks. Setting up took time. Moving took time. Self-propelled guns moved with the tanks. Stopped. Fired. Moved again. During the rapid advances of 1939–1941, German self-propelled artillery provided fire support without slowing the armored spearheads. The M7 Priest did the same for American armored divisions. The Su-152 could engage bunkers and tanks alike, versatility that towed guns simply couldn't match. Thin armor. Vulnerable to counter-battery fire. Most self-propelled guns had open-topped fighting compartments. The Priest's armor maxed out at 51 mm, enough to stop small arms. Nothing more. Crews were exposed to shell fragments, machine gun fire, air attack. Self-propelled guns rarely fired direct fire except in emergencies. They sat behind the front lines, vulnerable if the enemy broke through. Self-propelled artillery proved that mobility and firepower together mattered more than either alone. Armored personnel carriers protected troop transport, allowing infantry to keep pace with tanks and arrive with enough strength left to fight. The German SD.Kfz 251 Hanomag was produced in over 15,000 examples, carried up to 10 infantry plus crew, armed with machine guns, protected by 14.5 mm of armor, could reach 34 miles per hour. The American M3 half-track numbered over 40,000, served with U.S. and Allied forces worldwide. The British Universal Carrier was tiny but numerous, over 113,000 produced, used for reconnaissance, infantry support, weapons carrying. A critical detail often overlooked is how mechanized infantry changed combined arms warfare. Before APCs, infantry moved on foot or in unarmored trucks. Tanks advanced. Infantry fell behind. By the time infantry arrived, the tank battle was over. APCs solved this. German Panzer Grenadiers and Hanomags kept pace with panzer divisions. American armored infantry and M3 half-tracks arrived with the Shermans. This changed tactics fundamentally. Combined arms meant tanks and infantry operating together immediately. Not tanks first and infantry hours later. Limited armor protection. Still vulnerable to small arms fire. The Hanomag's 14.5 mm armor stopped pistol rounds and shell fragments. Not rifle bullets at close range. Heavy machine guns punched through easily. Artillery was lethal. The M3's open top made crews vulnerable to grenades and overhead fire. The Universal Carrier's 10 mm armor was barely more than a steel shell. APCs didn't win battles themselves, but they ensured infantry could arrive at the right place before the battle was already lost. World War II armored warfare was never just about tanks. It was about combined arms, light tanks finding gaps, tank destroyers ambushing armor, self-propelled guns providing fire support, APCs delivering infantry. Each vehicle solved problems that firepower alone never could. The armies that understood this diversity, not just tank production, were the ones that won. If this breakdown helped you understand World War II armor more clearly, leave a like and let me know in the comments which vehicle you found most interesting. Subscribe for a more deep, evidence-based military history.